Okay, welcome to this session titled Tending the Imagination, Teaching Students to Grasp the Imagery of the Faith. It will be presented by Dr. Thompson, who is Associate Professor of Chemistry at Concordia University, Wisconsin. Please welcome Dr. Thompson.
Thank you. Wow. I've never presented with a microphone before, so I was a little surprised. As it says in the front, there's a handout, and if you want to, every lecture there's a little bit of playing along. If you want to play along with the idea of how it's intended to go, please leave page 2 and 3 alone until later. There will be some time to read that later on in the session. If you get bored and read it now, that's fine, but you'll just be bored later then, so it won't help much. All right, so I'm going to talk about tending the imagination, and we could say teaching or training. It really makes us think about reason, and I think the imagination and the reason are separate things, so that's why I picked the word tending, and I'm going to try to use as much imagery and imagination in this presentation as I can. I mean, it's a talk, so it is going to be reason-based, but that's how it is. As you heard, I'm a chemist here, and so I feel a little bit like I should address a little bit why a scientist is concerned about this, and how that has anything to do with what I'm going to talk about. And then we're going to move into what I decided to call the ministerial use of the imagination, and I figured I'll leave the magisterial misuse of the imagination for you to imagine. And then some practical things, because I think that short stories and novels are good practice sets, or like ways to start teaching how to use your imagination rather than just your reason. Some stuff about that. And then people end up presenting the way that they lecture if they lecture too much. So we have like practice problems at the end. The first one I'll walk through, and the second one is the story I handed you. It's a story that I wrote, and then we'll talk about that. We'll see how much time there is. All right. We'll start with what this has to do with science, and I've actually shown this quadrant at a different CCLE quite a while ago. I don't know, several years. I think of this as the quadrant of the different disciplines of human reason, and I have how much math is involved on one axis and how dirty your hands get on the other axis. And generally speaking, if it is something that you can study with your mind, we could plot it on this. And the interesting thing is this has to do with the nature of the subject, not the nature of the person thinking. That is conveniently on the axis that's left to your imagination, the z-axis that's coming out right at you where I put that star. That z-axis is an attribute of the one thinking. And usually people don't know. So I deal with XYZ coordinate planes in chemistry. I don't think people visualize it correctly. So most of my answer for what this has to do with science is also like get you to imagine something first. So the z-axis, like this on the right, like people frequently draw it. There's no 45-degree angles, right? But there is, if we take the ends of the x-axis and the y-axis and the equal distance up the z-axis, if we connect those points, that's an equilateral triangle. And so I want you to try to imagine rotating this one on the left. This one, here, I'll get rid of it. That one on the right's just distracting because it's so wrong. This one on the left, rotate it up towards you. You can maybe pick up in your mind the x and the y-axis and pull it towards you and try to imagine what the axes will look like if that equilateral triangle is facing you. So let you think about that. All right. It actually looks like this. If we pull those up, we get the x, y, and z axis coming out at us. We're looking at a section of space where, I can't remember, this is like high math and hands very dirty, and there's a lot of imagination on this one, right? But the imagination is an attribute of the one thinking, and I think applies all the way across the 2D plane. So that's it. You can think about that, and as you think about that, I think you'll see how this is related to the sciences. All right. I'm going to describe a world in a short story that a lot of people don't have the precise cross-section of novel and short story reading that I have. This is from Orson Scott Card, and there's a world. This is a short story from the Worthinger saga. In that world, there is the capital planet of like an interstellar human civilization. And on that planet, there's a short story set while it's becoming the capital planet, and there's an artist who paints an indigenous tree that they call the whip trees. The whip trees are beautiful and flexible, and they blow over in the wind like the trees in Robert Frost's A Swinger of Birches, and then they pop back up when the wind is gone. And the artist paints those in all the beautiful things. And his friend, the architect, designs a big modular city that goes down to the bedrock and like up into the atmosphere and is just steel on the surface so that spaceships can land on it. And by the end of the story, essentially the planet is sheathed in steel. So that's why I have a steel ball, right? This is actually, it's a ball bearing, but it's the planet, it's sheathed in steel. Now, the point of the story is something else, but that world, I think, is a good one to picture when you think about taking someone who was raised in the metal hallways of Capitol. It's very cleverly called Capitol. And his parents were raised in the metal hallways of and like none of them have seen anything beautiful for real, right? How could you teach that kind of person what beauty is? And I think that no matter how much like text you would read, no matter how many definitions you could give, you'd only, with difficulty, you might grasp a little bit. I think of it like picking things up with your toes. I mean, it's technically possible, but it's really not the right way to do it. The only real way to grasp what's beautiful is to see and experience and contemplate and wonder at what's beautiful. And then the texts can help you refine what you think about it, but you can't actually understand it through reason. You'd have to show somebody in that planet the paintings made by the artist, the paintings of the whip trees, the paintings of the beauty. You might be able to teach him something about it, and that would be like picking the idea up with your hands. I think your imagination is more like your hands and your reason are more like your feet. They're different operations. They're there for different purposes. At the very least, I mean, it doesn't have to be hands and feet in your mind, but I think they're there for different things. So going from beauty, which is sort of the realm of art, I think. If we talk about duty, my examples from the U.S. Army, we have, what is duty? Duty is fulfilling your obligations. And there's more text there, and you can read more paragraphs. But if you read through this definition and this answer, I don't think this actually helps you identify what your duty is, see what your duty is, and then actively go do it, whether you want to or not. I think that what does that is watching people do their duty, watching a father do his duty to his children, or an employer do his duty to his employees. But I think, and this is why I brought up capital, I think for ideas like duty or loyalty or companionship, these are so lost, especially outside this audience, but these are so lost in the world that it's almost like the whip trees, where many people don't have a way to grasp what duty actually is. They're trying to pick the idea up with their toes by reading definitions. They might be trying to use trial and error, which can be a disaster. And I think that for people who can't just go observe duty, you can get some of it by observing it in the imagination from short stories and novels. It can help you learn what this actually means in a way that actually instructs you. It's still not as good as if we lived in a society that, many children don't have their fathers at home, or all of these different places that people should be doing their duty and aren't. It would be better for everyone if we lived in a better society. Right? Great news. Go home. But another thing I think we've lost is that our imaginations have been sterilized. I think there's a lot of things in modern society that paves over the imagination, like too much stimulation, not enough wonder. And so we have to start by strengthening the imagination and training the imagination to be a minister so that you can understand things you need to understand. Right? We don't want it to get out of control, which is very easy if you're very imaginative. But for the most part, that's not the main problem. The main problem is strengthening it and growing it. All right, we'll move to the next main sections. This is just practical things. So as you approach, if you pick things to read, I do not believe that anything is imagination neutral. If you're familiar with the concept of a spy novel, it's where the author wants you to accept things sort of and bypass the reason, so that you see something and you love it accidentally with your reason bypassed. And when Christians do this, it's a good thing, but everybody's a spy. Every storyteller has an axe to grind or something, right? It's not necessarily the driving motivation, but everybody's a spy, and so you have to pick carefully. And that's why I say you have to teach the imagination for defense. If you're picking stories to be read, you can be like, oh, not that one. But also, you would train children into being able to defend themselves. So your reason can usually work out that something is a problem, but it's actually a much slower warning system than if your imagination does it. And so if you're doing stories, novels, TV shows, poetry, usually your imagination, if it's trained properly, is a much faster warning sign than your reason's going to be. So it's got to be useful for defense and for the instruction like we were talking about with duty. So you have to go out of your way to find the good imagery and the right stories. A little bit more, specifically on short stories. If you read The Lord of the Rings, one of the best parts, I like the Entwives and the tragic tale of the Ents who've lost the Entwives. And it's a really long novel, and there's plenty of time to wander off and talk about other things. And in a short story, sometimes people think that short stories are either the author ran out of steam or the author got rid of all the interesting stuff. Done properly, the short story is essentially only about the Entwives. It's about the one little thing. And it's a little bit like moving imagery for a short little snippet of time. I think it's called like a moving icon. And so being short, it's one of its advantages. You can be more focused. It's very focused. Another series of things for short stories. The best thing is it doesn't take long to read a short story. So it doesn't take very long to know whether it's valuable to read. If you want to select fiction for children to grow in good and godly imagination, you should read it first, I guess. So short stories are convenient because you can read it and decide whether it's valuable or not. And it can really condense the ideas down. And there can be a lot of ideas in a short period of space. I like to think, in terms of format, the short stories to the novel, it's like the sonnet of the prose world. You have to pick the words carefully, you have to pick the structure carefully, the imagery has to be done right, because there isn't time to get something wrong and get back to it. All right. So, if you're trying to instruct the imagination, you can't go about it in the same way that you would try to instruct the reason. And so, a lot of times, comprehension questions end up being reason questions. Like, who's the protagonist? Or, what was the conflict? And how did how was it resolved? These are reason questions. I've always found them really dull reason questions. I hope that's not insulting to anyone. Also, you shouldn't ask, that was too many. What lesson can we learn? Not everything's an allegory. Once you ask what lesson can we learn, you've forced it to be an allegory. That's sort of a hard thing, so sometimes you can discuss it and kind of make a bit of an allegory out of it, and then just, as long as you back off eventually, and don't force it to be an allegory, it works out. But not everything's an allegory, not everything has a lesson to learn from it. So we have to be careful with that. I have a quote from, I actually don't know who wrote the essay that I was quoting, but the book was edited by Montgomery, about you can't have everything be a Christ figure. Not every story has a Christ figure. And that doesn't mean they're not valuable. It's just not in the story, so you can't force it in. You also can't ask something like, what's the beginning of the story, what's the middle of the story? Novels usually have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Not always, but they usually do. Short stories frequently don't. Short stories are frequently the end, and you have to work out the beginning. Or maybe it leaves out the middle because there wasn't time for it, it was boring or something. And so it's not going to follow that kind of pattern. It's also sort of a nuts and bolts set of questions that engages the reason first, which is the wrong way to handle it. So I'm going to talk through, and this is the front page of the handout, so I'm not sure how well you'll see there, but that's why I put it on the handout. My suggested types of questions, I start with more what I think are imagination questions, and it sort of moves into questions that I view as applying your reason to the information that your imagination has given you. Question like, what are the symbols in the story? Not everything that you find in a short story is going to be a symbol. That would also be nonsense. But anything might be, so you have to go through and let your imagination sort of play with the different things and help you pick out which ones are the symbols. Then your imagination can match symbols to symbols and see where those symbols match up, see if they're consistent with those things in Scripture. If they're not, that should be a warning sign. Another thing, I really don't like, how does this make you feel, so I tried to write it differently. But stories are usually written with the intent to produce a result in the reader. And one of those results is how the reader feels. So we do have to see, what mood the story has and how that affected you, the reader, are important pieces of information that are at least information that your imagination gives you. Your reason's now going to work with it, but that comes from your imagination that tells you this is what happened. Once we start talking about how those symbols and the tone, how that goes together. We've moved into reason questions, but they are with information, like a data set that's from your imagination. A lot of time, like, everything's a spy novel for something. Another way of saying that, everything's an apologetic for something. So it's trying to convince you to think or feel or react a particular way. And I put handy boxes. I felt they were handy. The blue ones are on the ones that are primarily imagination, and then the second half, these are moving into reason. All right. So we're going to move into what I'm calling case study. It's essentially worked problem 1. And this is not from a short story, but I tried to pick something I thought many people may have read. Short stories are harder to work out what someone might have read, but I don't know. I thought The Princess and the Goblin was not unlikely. If you haven't read The Princess and the Goblin, I have enough information here that you're gonna follow just fine. So in this case, we're going to try. Well, you can pretend or not pretend, and I say build an image in your mind of the grandmother as we go through. You can, it's honestly nap time, so no one will know if you're imagining or napping. You can close your eyes and imagine the grandmother. And I have some passages and some things so that you can build a coherent whole. And I don't know if anyone's played this game with your kids, but this is a great game. This is called Set, and you have to find sets. And those are defined as either all the characteristics of 3 cards are the same or they're all different. So, like the green triangle and the green ovals and the green squiggles over there, they're all different shaded. That would be a set. So I like that way of thinking. We're going to build a set of characteristics that is the grandmother and then compare it to other sets to see what our imagination tells us that she is. All right, so you can play along. I won't know if you're not playing along, but you can play along and try to start constructing a correct image of the grandmother. This is all excerpts from The Princess and the Goblin. I'm only going to read 1 or 2, and the others I'll just give you the bullet points for the sake of time. But the first time you meet the old lady, the grandmother, the main character is Irene. She's run off, and she goes up and opens an attic door, and she sees a very old lady who sat spinning. And when I was practicing this, I called this the first iconographic accoutrement. And I'm just going to say that. I couldn't come up with a better way to call it. There's probably a technical term for the symbols that tell you which saint you're looking at in an icon, and it's not iconographic accoutrement, but the spinning and the spinning wheel is one of her symbols. So you can kind of set that aside. I'm going to read this one. One of the things with George MacDonald is his prose is beautiful. So that sometimes clouds the reason, but makes the imagination stronger. So I'll just read this one aloud. Perhaps you will wonder how the princess could tell that the old lady was an old lady, when I inform you that not only was she beautiful, but her skin was smooth and white. I will tell you more. Her hair was combed back from her forehead and face, and hung loose far down and all over her back. That is not much like an old lady, is it? Ah, but it was white almost as snow. And although her face was so smooth, her eyes looked so wise, that you could not have helped seeing she must be old. Right, so another character trait of the old lady is that she's young old. Right? She seems old, she seems young, she's young old. All right? I'm not going to read this one. Irene goes with the old lady and kind of steps out and sees a multitude of the loveliest pigeons. These pigeons are the second iconographic accoutrement of the old lady. What are pigeons? Does anyone know what a pigeon actually is? It's a dove, yeah. So like it says pigeons, but you should think doves. And it's clearly these are doves. George MacDonald just wanted to call them pigeons. The squabs. She only eats the eggs, though, so we'll leave them doves. All right. Later, Irene finally makes it back up to the old lady. She had started thinking that it was a dream, and we find out that one of the reasons Irene couldn't find the great old grandmother is that she didn't want to be found. I think that's an important note. You just file it away in the image that you're building. All right. Later, Irene sees not just the spinning room, which only has a spinning wheel, but the bedroom. And stepping into the bedroom, it's shaped like you would describe the heavens. It has a moon in the middle and stars on the walls. It's like stepping into the heavens. When the grandmother is crowned, she looks very different. And I'm not going to read, it's beautifully written. And just the highlights, her hair is not white anymore, it's gold. She doesn't look anything old anymore, she just looks young. She's wearing a crown. This is her crown that she wears. It's another of her symbols. And there's no ornament on her at all except her crown, which is covered with pearls and opals, shiny things that look like stars, and on her slippers, which glimmered with the light of the Milky Way, which is like saying she's walking through the Milky Way. She's walking through the heavens. I think these are most of the picture. And so I'm going to go, you have a pretty complete set of the grandmother, and I'm going to go to what she might be. And I think this is the easy first answer, and I don't think it's right. I mean, it's the first one. How could it be the right one? I think there's some things that don't match this set. I think that despite the fact that she does some things that are consistent with a fairy godmother, she's not just a fairy godmother. And I'm going to highlight some conflicts. For if you imagine the set of things that are the grandmother, you can imagine the set of things that are the fairy godmother, and there's a bunch of stuff that isn't part of the same thing. It's that bunch of stuff that's your clue that you've got the wrong imagery. And one of them is the crown. The fairy godmother's not a queen. If you've read the story, what she's spinning is a magic thread that Irene uses to save Curdy from the goblins and then save them both on the way back out. It's really a thread of fate, and there's no other good way of thinking about it. All of the stars of heaven and her moon. And I think her moon might be enough that I gave it its own slide. Her power is very closely correlated to the moon. And now this is reason. My imagination says there's something to look at here. This is exclusively reason. But her power is directly correlated with the moon. She can only spin when the moon is shining, for example. The room that is, at least symbolically, the heavens, is just an attic when the moon is out. When the moon is lit, it is the heavens. So I think if we put this together, especially the queen and the heavens, I don't think this is the right answer, but this, I don't think anyone in the room is going to give me grief for saying this is wrong, right? Mary is not the queen of heaven, and I actually think that this is wrong because I don't know how to put it. I'll just wait. This is not quite right. If you ever read The Princess and Curdy, which is the sequel, and the one that's referenced in The Hideous Strength, you will find in chapter 7 what I can only really describe as a kind of pagan theophany. When she appears to Curdy and his father, she's given titles that are clearly goddess titles: Mother of Light, Lady of the Silver Moon. And so, with this in mind, I found what I thought was a perfect drawing of the godmother. It's got doves that are her doves. She's wearing a crown. She's got golden hair. We have the heavens and the stars behind her and the moon in its phases because her power changes with the moon. I think that this is the godmother. Does anyone know who this is actually supposed to be? Close. I found this on a witch website for Astarte, the Queen of Heaven. So it's Astaroth. But, I mean, Artemis is, like, yeah. It's essentially, George MacDonald has, as far as I can tell, put Astarte into his story. And that's not fun because George MacDonald is fun to read, but it is a clear warning, I think, that you should be, maybe not letting the kids consume a lot of George MacDonald. So in my mind, this is an example of imagination as defense. Let's see here. The timing's going okay. So we're going to move into the next example. The next example is, well, it says the good king, so it's not really a big surprise. Don't start reading it yet. I Googled, and Google may have lied to me, but Google told me that it should take 5 minutes to read. Yeah, I have no idea. We'll see how it goes. I think that the topic of a good king is an important one because, I have Constantine, King Edwin, who I named my oldest son after, and Clovis being baptized. And these men were good kings. They weren't just effective rulers. They were good in a way that's hard to imagine since our society is obsessed with democracy. And so I think it's another concept like duty. We can't, here I've got this. If we start saying that there's no such thing as a good king, it's a very quick, slippery slope because Christ is the king. And so we can't say that there's no such thing as a good king, and we should try to understand what a good king is. And those are very difficult for people who there are no kings. And I mean, there's a few kings in the Arab countries, but they're not good ones. So it's difficult. All right, so at this point, I would like it if you read the story, if you'd like. It is maybe a little intense. My wife said I should warn people, but I don't really know how to warn people. If you don't like it, we can still talk about it and illustrate the point for it. But I'm going to shut up for, 7 minutes-ish? It's a guess. And I'll turn this off so I don't. I'll wait. I'll wait quietly for about one more minute, and then, sorry, start again. All right. Is it on? Yeah, it's on. All right. It's officially my most read story ever now, so that's cool. All right. I have just a few of the images that I thought might be good to get correct. So at the beginning, I'm thinking regular wolf, and then at the end, they're like really huge. So that was one thing. Another thing is, if you've never heard of a Wendigo before, it's a like an Algonquin in northern U.S. Native legend of a cannibal demon. It's not fun or pleasant. And the shotgun at the end, I'm thinking of these guys, which I promised to not laugh maniacally when I watched this, when I showed my wife, because I'm a chemist because I like fire. It's not the other way around. So, yeah, those are great. Someday I'll shoot one of those for fun. All right, just for a few minutes, because we're towards the end, and like I said, you give talks like you lecture, because that's just all you know, so I usually leave students like, oh, and here, you can go think about these things as you leave, and so I can't help it. The goal is to leave you with, if you were interested to keep thinking, we're not going to answer everything here. I just wanted to highlight an incomplete list of things that are symbols in this story. The cold, if you've never experienced -40 and evening, I have, so it's very clear in my mind. There's also everything in it that could potentially be fire. We have sparks, and we have the attempt to build a fire. This isn't written as an allegory, but everything that has to do with fire, and you think about fire in Scripture, and are they consistent? I wouldn't have given it to you if I thought that it wasn't. I think that it is like the man trying to build his own fire. It's not an allegory for a man trying to make his own faith, but it's a fine image for that at the beginning. Another thing to keep in mind with stories, and in this one you can see it highlighted in the change in the wolves. A short story isn't a single instant usually. There's some change. And so the change in something over time matters. And to bring out sort of the big guns for this example, if your story is about someone who's alive and then is dead, that's a different thing than someone who's dead and then alive, right? So the order of things and as they happen is something important to keep in mind. Another thing that's important to keep in mind that, I'm supposed to talk for 45 minutes and I have. I'll only talk for like 2 more and then I'll be done. Is that the structure of the story is done on purpose. There's parallelism, and you can find sort of a center. In a lot of stories, especially short stories, these things are done on purpose by the author and help you convey meaning. And that needs to be involved too. If we think about apologetics topics, I think that you could say it's about duty. That's why I picked duty at the beginning. I think in some ways I'm just trying to write a story where someone does his duty despite the fact he doesn't want to, and ultimately has the strength to do his duty because of faith from outside that God has given him, right? There are times when you feel like you have the strength to do your duty and you just do it, and there's plenty of times where it doesn't feel like you have the strength, and the strength comes from God. So there's more that we could talk about, but I don't think it's worth it. So I think if you were interested, you could take the questions that I said you could ask, and you could apply it to the story as, like, it's fine, it's an exercise material. There are stories that you can ruin that way, and it would be tragic, but it's not tragic if you accidentally ruin a story for yourself that I wrote. So it would be a good practice problem, so to speak. I picked some oddball recommendations, or at least I thought some of them might be, that you could investigate. Graham Greene and Flannery O'Connor are pretty intense. I guess Edgar Allan Poe is too. Father Brown is not, though, and those are usually good. In novels, if you've never read Gene Wolfe, he's completely different, and I really like Gene Wolfe. There's not a lot of nonfiction that I wanted to recommend because it's heavy on the reason, and so I just have two up here because this is all about imagination. It's really hard to have a nonfiction that works there. The Master and His Emissary is a thick academic book. It's doesn't quite map exactly to reason and imagination. I can't remember the correct term. He's highly trained and knows what he's talking about when he talks about the brain. Talking about left brain and right brain things. There's a lot of overlap with what I'm talking about. All right, and so yeah, now I'm done, and I put this up just in case somebody recognizes it, because the sword's name is Terminus Est, and if someone recognizes it, we'll talk about Gene Wolfe later. So thank you, and I'll take any questions for the rest of the time.
So I have a microphone if you want. Let me get started. I really appreciate your emphasis on imagination. Appreciate that's really a well-written story. It seemed like you're really too hard on George MacDonald, though. C.S. Lewis, he was a Calvinist Christian, and C.S. Lewis said reading George MacDonald baptized his imagination. So to say not to read him, it seems to me that a couple other things are kind of implicit in what you're saying. We have to just look at not, well, here's a picture, here's a description, and oh, here's a picture of the witches do. That doesn't necessarily mean they're the same thing. It seems like you have to attend to the meaning of the image, of the symbol in the story, and the effect it has on a reader. Now, sometimes when we're reading, our imagination is engaged with, something pornographic or evil, or makes us hate someone. Okay, those are bad uses of imagination, like you were saying. And the meaning. If George MacDonald is trying to describe some mysterious woman, and the witches are also describing some mysterious woman, maybe they look the same. But I know there'd be no connection that George MacDonald was saying, oh, I'm going to put a witch in here and fool everybody and corrupt them. Nor was he a Catholic. So it's not the Virgin Mary. In that, it's been a while since I read that book, but it ends in a very positive, redemptive, healing resolution, as I remember the Princess and the Goblin. So that would be my only suggestion. I mean, if somebody were to misread yours, you could say, oh, a wolf, werewolves, that's a cult. But they'd be totally missing the point of your story. And so, I don't know. Was C.S. Lewis wrong in reading? Was he corrupted and led away from the faith by reading George MacDonald so much?
I think that, so trying to figure out where I want to start. You're absolutely right that try to describe, you have to be really careful with imagery because you could end up with very similar imagery for completely different ideas being conveyed. So just at the outset, I think that this scenario is at minimum a good case for your imagination warning you that this could be a problem, and then you have a responsibility to engage your reason and investigate it. That's sort of the first part of what I think there. With George MacDonald, if you, for instance, if you read At the Back of the North Wind, George MacDonald is, or Lilith. It's been a lot. I read Lilith in college and not since, so I don't actually remember that one. But it is about Lilith, so there's that. At the Back of the North Wind, he is very, very intent on mixing very beautifully done imagery that really is like. It's very often there's a goddess who is the only thing that really matters in the story. And so I think that caution is necessary. I also think that if you are coming into the faith, someone who helps you may not have been right in very much, and God can use that to help this person. So, there's a lot of things there that I think could happen. But I'm the goddess of the north wind and At the Back of the North Wind, I can't even finish that story because it's very clearly about a goddess interacting with a child. And I think he's consistent that this is basically the ruler, the great old grandmother, especially the Princess and the Goblin is very easy to not come to this conclusion. But if you read The Princess and Curdie, which is also not as well written, but it's very clear that she is the goddess of this world. She's, forging bloodlines as she sees fit. She's ruling this family to make them in the position that they're in. And I'm uncomfortable with that. And I think that this is the kind of rational discussion that goes very well after the imagination says, hey, you should find this unnerving that this image for a Stark Queen of Heaven is pretty much exactly what's being described. And then we have a discussion with our reasons to find out how dangerous or not dangerous this might be.
Okay, so you use the reason and attend to the effect that it has on you. And that may not be the same for everyone. A lot of the works you've described are very unsettling, like the Executioner's Apprentice by Gene Wolfe, who are also alive.
Yeah.
That's the sword, isn't it?
This is the sword from the Book of the New Sun.
Oh,
it is an executioner's sword.
Yeah, and Flannery O'Connor is also very unsettling. Those unsettling feelings, can be actually directed at something positive, as you say.
Sometimes the feelings that make you feel comfortable and peaceful and wistful are actually dangerous.
Could be. Okay, I've said enough.
So I'm wondering if, the conversation that the two of you just had made me wonder if part of the reason why some of us would like to stick up for MacDonald is because he speaks to the imagination so well, and we're so starved for it now that any instance of it being done well, we want to hold on to, right? And so when you put your, I don't know. First of all, I'll invite your comment on that. Do you think that I'm onto something there?
Yeah, I think that George MacDonald was exceptionally good.
Right.
And we should be most careful with the ones who are exceptionally good. Because it's much easier to be fooled by someone who's, and if he's not trying to fool you, that's one thing, but if he is, if someone could do it, it would be someone who's as good as George MacDonald.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so then this is more of like a writing process question for you. You know, I took a Flannery O'Connor class, and the prof was pretty intentional about talking about how Flannery O'Connor is a master of writing in a way that the symbols sort of accumulate meaning as the story progresses, right? Rather than just slapping it all on the first page, this is what's going on.
Right.
These symbols sort of accumulate meaning throughout the story. I think that you've done that here too in just a couple pages. So is that something that you're thinking about as you're writing, or what's sort of your process? Do you choose your symbols beforehand, or do you just get interested in something in the story and then go from there?
Usually, when I write a story that I've liked, it has started around, I'm extremely visual. Everything I do with words, I've learned sort of the hard way. I'm extremely visual. So it starts with an image, or maybe two, and then it accumulates the rest of the story around it. And really the point of the story is to convey an image and a feeling, and that's, and then I don't know. I don't know from there. Yeah.
Just kind of asking another question regarding the conversation. This isn't about George MacDonald. This is about an earlier point that you made about the questions you ask in literature are oftentimes, and I agree with you, you're actually the first person I've heard say it, where I think a lot of the questions we ask students in literature textbooks are extremely dull. What's the, what's the rising action? What's the climax? What's the, I find that really dull. I think that there are two things that are not problematic per se, but they're just considerations to make. Everyone else uses those terms. So it might be useful to teach your students those terms simply so that they can communicate about literature to other people. And the other thing is, do you think there is a way in which reason and the imagination can be nurtured simultaneously? Do they necessarily have to be in two separate categories in that way? Do we have to draw such a stark dichotomy, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so for the first thing, this is the rising action. That's a lot like saying this is what iambic pentameter is, and there is a really important place for teaching students the functions of pieces of a story. That's like, if you do that to a story, you have to then, you're basically taking it apart and looking at its guts. As long as you try to put it back together at the end, it doesn't hurt. And students do need to know, there is such a thing as a protagonist sometimes. Some stories don't seem to have one protagonist. You can teach them about unreliable narrators and that kind of thing. That won't hurt to have that. But when you're trying to grasp what a story is actually trying to do, those are the wrong questions. That's what I was thinking. And then with both words and images, or reason and imagination, I can't walk and chew gum, but some people probably can. So like I could imagine that it'd be possible to train both more simultaneously. I would not be able to do it.
Okay, one more question.
Thank you. Your introductory material reminded me of an essay that C.S. Lewis wrote. It's called Meditation in a Woodshed. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, but it's been a very long time.
Yeah, well, so he distinguishes between perceiving light, right, as you see a beam of light in a dark woodshed. So you see that's seeing it one way, and he distinguishes between that and looking along the beam of light, in which now you see, I don't remember exactly, maybe the tree outside the woodshed, and it's a different picture. Two different experiences, and both can be called seeing the light, I guess. And that's an illustration that he uses, I think, for, if I remember correctly, I think for seeing something maybe rationally versus imaginatively, or perhaps experiencing it rationally versus, in the imagination sense, experiencing it through your imagination. In other words, kind of living it as opposed to analyzing it. And it seemed like your introductory material was really kind of in that field, right? And he applies it also to things like mythology, maybe like Till We Have Faces, the novel, where in there, and I'm curious about how you would apply this, the imaginative distinction, where through a novel like that, you get to experience things which, unless I'm misreading him, but in his view, correlate in different ways, maybe metaphorically, but they correlate with the truth, even though that in that novel, it's in a pagan context, right? So
yeah, I have enjoyed. I've read Till We Have Faces a number of times, and this is definitely kind of the idea where you can learn to grasp things vicariously through the novel that you might not be able to in other ways. Like in Till We Have Faces, there's some beautiful imagery about sharing the other's burdens, and Orwell is enduring the pains while Psyche is doing the job. That I've always really appreciated, that one in particular. But
Okay, thank you very much.